What are we looking for out here? This isn't our turf. We don't speak the language. By all accounts, we do not belong here. But there's something intangible that draws us into the desert. And the story of this place extends farther into the past than we could have imagined.
Mi abuelo, el papá de mi papá, decía un dicho sabio de él. Hay tres cosas que forjan al ser humano, que es el orgullo, la vergüenza y dignidad. Porque si no tienes eso, mija, no eres nada.
The place we now call Baja California has been a source of fascination and danger for as long as it's been known to human beings. Many distinct waves of explorers have ventured here across time, and the arrival of each new group is accompanied by a powerful change in perspective. Native Americans migrated here over 10,000 years ago. Most things about them remain a mystery. Then came the first Europeans, conquistadors, who colonized the land at the expense of its previous inhabitants. Their views, in turn, were challenged by the next wave of explorers, scientists who came trying to make sense of the natural systems that govern this place. These naturalists were adventurers as well as intellectuals, and their work was crucial in advancing our knowledge of the natural world, but their achievements have largely fallen into obscurity. Today, we are in the midst of another change in perspective, one brought about by forces that threaten the very existence of life forms the early scientists came here to study. Maybe the answers to how we should approach the future can be found by taking a deeper look at our past.
Okay,
No.
should we do this?
Okay.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Ready?
I guess that is true. I forgot that part.
We were right next to the mango.
Yeah.
Baja's always been a place of exploration, of mystery, and intrigue for me.
Baja's a part of me. It's kind of hard to put into words. As a family, we had been going to Baja ever since I was really young. I think I was about a year old on my first trip.
I mean, I've been going to Baja since I was like 3 or 4 years old, but it didn't have a deeper meaning until a few years ago when we found out that we were related to one of the greatest naturalists to ever study the place, Edward Goldman.
Believe it or not, Edward Alphonso Goldman is my great-grand uncle.
I am the great-great-grandniece of Edward Goldman.
He's my great-great-grand uncle.
So who were Nelson and Goldman?
Nelson and Goldman were the link between the first wave of modern biologists, such as Charles Darwin, that were out collecting and changing the way we were looking at the world, and a whole new wave of biologists that are concerned with not just documenting the natural resources, but also advocating and protecting them.
Edward William Nelson grew up in tumultuous times. As a boy, he lost his father in the American Civil War, and he lost his home in the Great Chicago Fire. But he persevered and found his calling in the outdoors. Nelson made a name for himself in Alaska, where he studied the people and wildlife of the far north, traveling alongside John Muir and earning his Eskimo nickname, the man who buys good-for-nothing things. Returning to Washington, D.C., he contracted tuberculosis. A long recovery brought him west to drier climates, and an expedition to Death Valley proved his fortitude working in harsh deserts.
Everything that these naturalists did were things that we are somewhat familiar with today, but they were doing it at a level that was just unusually difficult and unusually strenuous. And for that reason, it's certainly appropriate to think of them in an almost heroic way. They are to be commended for the field work they did and really this internal fortitude that they had to go weeks and weeks, months and months, and not completely become exhausted and frustrated and quit.
En route to his next assignment, Nelson met a young Edward Alphonso Goldman. He came upon the Goldman Ranch by chance while trying to fix a broken wagon that had stranded him in Central California. The two men immediately connected over shared interests, and Nelson hired Goldman to be his field assistant. They worked well together. Goldman was a quick study, and they were soon dispatched as a team to Mexico by the U.S. Biological Survey.
They were sent to Mexico for what was supposed to be a 3-month expedition, and it lasted 14 years.
They traveled to every part of Mexico, collecting countless plant and animal specimens, many of which were previously unknown to science.
No one had even come close to the volume of specimens that they had collected, and no one has really come close since.
The last year of this expedition explored the entirety of Baja California, then considered one of the most remote and challenging regions of North America.
The two Edwards, Nelson and Goldman, started from San Diego and went all the way to Cabo. That's longer than the length of Italy. It took them more than a year. It's a huge distance through very harsh, inhospitable terrain, incredibly dangerous, and if you missed a water hole, you were dead. That's why there are so few explorations of that magnitude, and there's huge merit in that level of exploration.
Our research brought us to the Smithsonian Archives in Washington, D.C. Here we discovered the Nelson Goldman Collection, a treasure trove of field notes, correspondence, and photographs from their studies in Mexico. Their photos, specifically, blew us away. All the historical photos we show in this film were taken by Nelson or Goldman in the field, somewhere in Mexico.
Well, in 1905 and 1906, this was really the beginning of the portable camera, when biologists could take a camera into the field and not be busy with the camera all day long, hiking it in, taking the photographs and trying to develop them. The old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words, those photographs really complement the field notes because one shot does an amazing job of documenting all the things that nobody thought to write in their field note. And by going back to the photographs, you can actually look and see how the landscapes have changed.
Seeing their photos, being familiar with some of the places they went, it got us thinking about our own experiences in Baja and all the changes that have occurred over the last century. What would Nelson and Goldman find if they went back today? What comparisons could we make going back to Baja armed with their photos? Then it struck us. We had to do a modern recreation of their expedition.
We're going to set off for a 2-month and 5,000-mile journey up and down the peninsula, following the route of Nelson and Goldman's 1905 expedition.
We'll start from the north and work our way south. Like Nelson and Goldman, we'll be zigzagging back and forth across the peninsula, connecting points of interest. To help us cover as much ground as possible, we'll rendezvous with other members of the Bruce family in the north. Greg Meyer will drive down to help us cover central Baja, and Bree will fly to meet us at the Cape. We're also going to put together a separate trip, towing a boat to visit a number of islands Nelson and Goldman went to on their journey. All this will allow us to get as close as possible to replicating their original route, to see what they saw, and compare our observations to theirs. One last tweak. We're going to make the 21st century upgrade from horses to motorcycles.
Since neither of us have ridden a bike this big, we needed some experts.
Well, I have to say I'm excited and jealous at the same time. I wish I could go with you guys. I love these kind of adventures.
We had a really good mechanic, a select group of adventuring experts. All of these came together to help us.
Got a few odds and ends left, but feeling real confident. Should be good to go.
Unlike Nelson and Goldman, we needed the experience of the road to Laguna Hansen. Before Baja, they had spent the last 13 years in mainland Mexico. But our inexperience required us to get familiar with our gear and motorcycles. And I think that was crucial for us. We had a hard deadline to meet our aviation detachment at the San Felipe airport. My oldest brother was flying in as pilot, his wife as co-pilot. My other brother was driving down with our father. Baja is extraordinary, and we needed an extraordinary perspective.
This is a 1968 PA-32 Cherokee 6.
The minivan of the skies.
We got out first thing in the morning before the thermals started to pick up, and we had an incredible 2.5-hour flight of no turbulence. It was just absolutely spectacular.
San Felipe Tower, Cherokee 4163, Espinoza taking off. Okay, we're heading over to your dad. There he is. Got him. Got him? I see him. Here he comes.
Nice. Nice and low.
All right, I'm going to circle around, and then we'll make a little pass.
There we go.
This is really nice.
Yeah, you're telling me this is awesome.
This is really smooth. Yeah, later on today, man, it's going to be bumpy as hell.
From the air, the textures of the landscape leap out. It's a perspective Nelson or Goldman could only have dreamed of obtaining. In just this small cross-section of northern Baja, the huge variety and extreme ruggedness of the terrain is apparent. It's been more than 110 years since the original expedition struck out across this land. Rocky trails are now asphalt freeways. The horse has been replaced by the automobile. Villages have grown into cities. But what other, less tangible changes are happening outside our field of vision? And what can we learn by comparing past to present? In 1905, few roads existed here. The main route followed by Nelson and Goldman was along the El Camino Real. In their time, it was already centuries old. Parts of it have been continuously upgraded through the years and now form sections of the modern highway. Other parts were left to the ravages of weather and time. But the nature of their work meant they often had to leave roads and trails behind.
When Nelson and Goldman left San Felipe, they headed into the Sierra San Pedro Mártir. And that required a 50-mile journey, cross-country, with no water. We came here with one goal, to find the Nelson Trout.
Fly fishing for trout has been a tradition in our family for generations. So we took it upon ourselves to find a subspecies of the rainbow trout, named in honor of Edward Nelson. The Nelson trout was originally isolated to only one river, It was transplanted to other streams like this one in the 1930s, using 5-gallon milk jugs strapped to the backs of mules. Despite the transfer to new habitats, the fish is still rare.
We got a late start on the first day, and we got skunked. But we did learn, though, that further up the canyon, the pools got bigger, and it was a little easier fishing.
Our second day was make or break.
It looks like a Nelson Trout. It's got those blue marks, that crimson thing behind it. This one's older. He's got a bunch of spots. He's got a white tip on the top and the ventral. He was right in that hole. I had to let it go through the deep part, and he came out and got it. Took 2 tries. I saw one come once.
The Nelson Trout, the only trout species in Baja California. They're small, but they're kind of voracious, you know. They'll attack a good fly. And because there's very few of them here, we practice catch and release.
This has just been a wonderful experience for me, seeing my family, enjoying, reminiscing, and replicating some of the work that was done. Catching of Nelson Trout is just something extra special. And we're talking on the way back here about the emotion that developed from this whole expedition, being a part of it, and how proud I am of my children that respect this whole concept here of preserving our nature and understanding it and living with it.
Successfully catching one of the rarest trout on Earth felt like an early victory. But as we got back to Mike's Sky Ranch, we met some old bikers who warned us about the road ahead.
When you leave Mike's, just getting out of here, you're not going to get those KLRs up out of here.
Well, if you could do it, you're a much better man than any of us guys, because I wouldn't even attempt it. Those bikes are made for what you drove into the ranch.
Yeah.
This is 80% more. All you got to do is just walk just to right here and have a look.
The whole road up to the top from Mike's Sky Ranch is just like this. Once we get up here, what's going to happen at the next place?
If you get started one way and you run out of resources, it can be ugly.
Just loose rocks and solid rock. You hook up and then you don't hook up.
Yeah. You ain't getting, no. So whoever's listening, believe what I'm saying.
We were convinced. If we were going to reach the top of the Sierra San Pedro Mártir and reconnect with the original expedition's route, we had to part ways with the rest of the Bruce family and take the long way around. 15 miles by dirt road became 250 by highway. But the view from the top of the mountain was worth it. Picacho del Diablo is the highest peak in Baja, a sky island whose elevation separates it from the deserts below. At the campground, we met a group of Mexican biologists who'd come into the mountains to photograph wildlife.
I don't speak in very good English, but I try to say, hi friends, my name is Nathan Velasco.
We are here with my team doing a photo expedition.
Maybe when you come into Baja, you see different environments, but all is one environment, and the environment is Baja.
In San Pedro Mártir, we have seen condor, coyote, and deers. The most amazing thing was the condor that was flying above us.
We looked for the California condor. Nelson and Goldman said the birds were common, and they collected several specimens on their way through here.
It's an amazing bird.
It's the largest land bird in North America. In the 1800s, condors used to range all the way along the coast. And then the last condor was seen in San Pedro Mártir in 1937. Part of the reason of their decline is there's a less availability of large mammals for their food. So because of the less availability in food, less habitat, urban encroachment, and lead, condors have had a hard time in the last century in North America.
Today, the condor is one of the rarest birds in the world. And for us, the skies were empty.
Cuando los caminos buenos hay gente de toda y con los caminos malos hay gente buena. Pues aquí en el Rosario no ha cambiado mucho. Casi se puede decir que está igual. Lo único que ha cambiado es la carretera.
Everyone who passes through El Rosario knows about Mama Espinoza's. Her place was put on the map after it was used as the first checkpoint in the original 1967 Baja 1000 race. We spoke with her daughter and great-granddaughter.
El 32 ya mi mamá era un restaurante con una mesa. Y como Baja California siempre ha sido atractiva, codiciada, pasaba un que otro americano y ella hacía amistad con ellos.
On the day we passed through town, they were hosting a charity motorcycle ride that marked 1 year after Mama Espinoza's death.
Solía ayudar a las personas de este pueblo. Entonces, ahora que cumple 1 año, la familia decidió organizar un paseo de motos en memoria de ella. Es muy bonito.
Carretero, no maltrates a ese pobre güey tan viejo que ya dobla la cabeza con el peso de los carros.
An island is like its own world. And each one visited by Nelson and Goldman has its own character. Isla San Martín on the northern Pacific coast is no exception. In the late 19th century, the elephant seal was hunted to the brink of extinction. They were long gone by the time Nelson and Goldman visited. Now that the hunting has ceased, elephant seal numbers have recovered, and they've since returned to protected areas like Isla San Martín. These scientists are here looking for other changes happening on the island. They came to study nesting marine birds and to tag the snakes that prey on the birds' eggs.
As Americans, we have to really respect what Mexico has done in terms of preserving their offshore islands, working with the United Nations to create these biosphere reserves. So when I go to Mexico, I look at it as an opportunity to learn from them, as well as to share my own perspectives with the locals and Mexican scientists.
But it's not just the animals that catch the attention of scientists. Strange and unique plant life is everywhere in Baja. Many endemic species were documented by Nelson and Goldman, and the flora of the peninsula makes it a major destination for botanists today.
Baja California is an amazingly diverse area in respect to plants. We still do the same type of collecting that we did in the times of Nelson and Goldman. How we use and interpret those specimens has really changed in 100 years, but the collecting hasn't really changed at all. 25% of all of the plants that you find on the peninsula are endemic or unique to the peninsula. Not only do you have climate factors driving evolution and differentiation of plants, but you also have a lot of geology on the peninsula. And all of that together has given us a huge diversity, about 4,000 plants. Some groups, like cacti, are even more special. Most cacti that you see as you're driving down the peninsula and visiting different areas only occur on the Baja California Peninsula. One of the more unique succulents is what's called the cirio or bujum tree. It can take weird shapes depending on how it's growing, and it may turn back on itself, and you see a landscape or a forest of the cirios, and it is really one of the more unique things in the world.
One of the guys we'd met up in the mountains a few days ago, Nathan Velasco, invited us to meet up with him and his friends in his small hometown, a place called Cataviña.
I am from Cataviña. Cataviña is a small town in the middle of the desert.
It was a pretty treacherous ride on a sandy road in the dark to get out to his cabin. But by morning, we were glad we made the trip. Nathan's family owns an 8,000-acre ranch called La Bocana, a place on the Central Peninsula where 3 rivers converge.
No, pero aquí nomás, pues ahí está la cabaña. El torto es chips.
His land is full of evidence of the people who lived here in the distant past. Like this stone circle, built by the Cochimi, and this ancient rock art, discovered by cowboys only a few decades ago. In Baja, you never know who you're gonna meet. You gotta be ready to make friends and change plans.
Today in the morning we went to an oasis. You could swim in there. It was so cold, but it was very nice. Very, very nice. Such an adventure.
One of the limiting factors for most plants on the peninsula is water. But when a lot of rainfall comes, you can get areas of low desert where lots of plants come up and flower and bloom and show themselves for the first time in many years. We will sometimes call those a super bloom.
We happened to be driving through after an unusually wet winter, when the desert was exploding with wildflowers.
Hey, guayaba.
South of Bahia de Los Angeles is a remote beach, Playa San Rafael. It has only one permanent resident, our friend Pancho.
So we first met Pancho in the early 1990s when we camped on the northern end of his beach.
Oh, Pancho. We always looked forward to him making the trek down the beach and sitting by a campfire at night with him, drawing pictures in the sand because there was a language barrier.
But Pancho would never let us leave without first giving us something. And so we would always ask what he needed that we could bring down the next time we came.
Playa San Rafael, Pancho's place.
Over the years, Pancho and my dad basically became buddies.
Hola, Pancho. Hola, Pancho.
It's mi amigo Todd.
Which is hilarious because they can barely understand each other.
For me?
He immediately fed us beers and wanted to take tequila shots.
Salud, mi amigo.
Mi amigo.
Mis amigos. Salud.
Which might explain why this shot is out of focus.
Electronic, Pancho. ¿Por qué no?
Mano a mano.
Mano a mano. Muchas historias.
Pancho's always got a lot to talk about.
Oh.
He told us about scaring away banditos with his dogs.
Bandidos. Los echan en carro y bye-bye. Estúpidos.
He told us about how his home was destroyed in the 2014 hurricane, then rebuilt with the help of some American friends.
Tranquilo.
Más joven.
He even told us how, after recurring dental problems, he had a friend remove all of his teeth with a pair of pliers and a knife.
No problema. Con las pinzas. Pancho, dice así. ¿Qué pasó? Mira lo que tienes en las pinzas.
Oh. Mucho tequila.
No, nothing. No, dolor. Hielo y hielo, así. Pero así. Y así hacía. Bastante feo. Pero es hermoso. Es hermoso.
With a little bit of help and a lot of ingenuity, Pancho's got a pretty good setup.
Y tengo 31 años aquí. Y siempre joven. Con Mr. Tao.
But it's tough living way out here. And the fortunes of the Gulf are in flux.
El futuro, pues ya estamos. No hay comprensión en el ser humano, prácticamente. El agua ha cambiado. Los peces han desaparecido. Los pescadores destruyen a los delfines. La muestra, ahí está, delfines muertos. Los pescadores tiran basura en cantidad, aceite, gasolina, botes, todo. Y yo, Pancho, con mi carretilla y mis bolsas, voy y recojo la basura. Me enojo, pero ¿qué hago? No entienden. Así es la historia. Ahora, el cambio climático, no puedo ser Dios para ayudar. Solamente yo, mi comprensión, mi lugar.
Global issues like overfishing and climate change have effects on even the most out-of-the-way places, like Pancho's Beach. One tiny island, Isla Raza, is another of these places. Nelson and Goldman never came here. It's so small it's not even on their map. But the changes happening on Raza are a microcosm of the pressures facing Baja at large.
Today's trip and a big part of this expedition for me is to kind of rediscover these places that I got turned on to as a young man that really, I think, changed my life. And Isla Raza is definitely one of those places. There's something about it. It's magical. It's this little tiny spot in the middle of the ocean, and it's just throbbing with life. It was one of the very first islands in the Gulf of California that was declared a wildlife sanctuary with the specific purpose to try to preserve the two species that breed there primarily, and that is the Heermann's gull and the elegant tern, both of which, better than 90% of the world's population of those two birds, breed solely on that one little island that's only about 1 square mile.
Although they never came to Isla Raza, Nelson and Goldman were early supporters of bird conservation. They were instrumental in the adoption of some of the first international laws to protect migratory birds across North America. Their fieldwork and collections laid the scientific foundation allowing these laws to gain support. It's very possible that without their work, the rich biodiversity of birds on the peninsula would not be what it is today. Knowing this, their methods may be surprising.
One of the things that we as naturalists would do today, anyone who's interested in birds, for example, would be interested in buying a pair of binoculars that are as good as you can get, because it would aid you in seeing as many birds and identifying them as clearly as possible. It is almost inconceivable today to imagine carrying a shotgun in the field. In fact, it probably would be illegal. But back in the times of the late 19th century and the early 20th century, all naturalists, certainly all bird collectors, used only a shotgun as their method of collecting.
Today, most people have a strong reaction against killing animals for scientific purposes. But other human activities are indirectly leading to much larger problems.
What we see here on Isla Raza is an interplay between two factors. One is climate change and the increasing sea surface temperature, as well as human activity in the winter when the overfishing of sardines and herring is taking place, so that those species are not there to feed the terns. It's sort of bittersweet to go back to Raza, where normally there would be 5,000 to 10,000 breeding elegant terns at this time of year, and to see it completely bare of elegant terns with only a smattering of Heermann's gulls around the edge. Isla Raza, this focal point for elegant terns, has now been abandoned, left behind because there's not enough food offshore to feed the elegant terns and their chicks. The Gulf of California and the Central Desert are amazing places, and most summers I teach at a research station there with my teaching partner and good friend, Guy Van Cleve.
I've been to many other deserts, and the Central Desert of Baja is the most spectacular. There's vastness and desolation. And those two things, for me, are spiritually invigorating. Every time I come down, I have another adventure, and I come back refreshed.
In the desert, water is critical. Sections of Nelson and Goldman's route would not be possible without these naturally occurring pools, called tinajas.
Tinaja is an old Spanish word for a clay jar, and in the desert, a tinaja is a natural hole or sink where rainwater collects. It's used by all the desert animals and people as an important but ephemeral source of water. In Baja, many of the large tinajas are known and mapped and are sources of water today. This part of the Central Desert gets rainfall in the winter and the summer, and big storms will raise the water up dramatically. You can see the high water mark here. And then as the year goes on, the tinaja sinks down and gets replenished again by next year's rain.
When outfitting their pack train, Nelson and Goldman preferred to ride ordinary saddle horses, something the locals thought they were crazy for attempting. They were told that only mules could survive the trip. The dangers were clear. Nelson wrote, "We were assured that no one had ever made such a journey. There were hundreds of miles of uninhabited, waterless desert to cross where there was no feed, and in addition to dying of thirst, our animals would surely perish of starvation, while our own chances were scarcely worth mentioning." Nevertheless, all of their original animals survived, and all but two made it with them the entire trip. Several times, their animals became so exhausted they had to rest for 10 to 15 days at a single location.
Some of the expeditions that we do today, we require local guides and animal support. A lot of people think it's easier to do exploration today, which is true in respect to the roads and infrastructure. We've got four-wheel drives that can get to pretty remote areas. However, it stops there. Once you get to a remote area and you need to go up into a mountain, still, like in the time of Nelson and Goldman, we have to go and access them with mule and burro support.
Right behind me is Mission Santa Gertrudis down here in this valley. And we're on our way on this trail right here up to Goldman Peak.
During our research, we found that there's a peak in Baja named Goldman Peak. We couldn't find it. None of today's maps had Goldman Peak on it.
All we had was Nelson's map and a written description. It placed the mountain at 5,000 feet of elevation on the 28th parallel of latitude, just northeast of Santa Gertrudis Mission. That sounds good until you realize Nelson put the mission south of the 28th parallel on his map, when we know today the mission is actually north of this latitude. Of course, we have the luxury of 21st century maps. So, any criticism from these gringos
You guys, you're pretty good at setting broken legs, right?
should be taken with a grain of salt.
Nelson named a wide variety of features, one of which was the Vizcaíno Desert. It's still a name in use today. He named Goldman Peak and he named Bryant Peak. Neither of those have stuck.
It makes sense that this name never caught on with the locals. And sure enough, more research revealed a Spanish name for the peak, Cerro Cantera Rosa. The descriptions matched, modern maps were consistent. We think we found it.
Yeah, man, it's crazy hot. It's crazy rocky. It's crazy far.
The magnificent, glorious Goldman Peak. It's completely surrounded by super photogenic valleys and mountains and peaks and all this lush cactus vegetation. And when we got up here, what we got was a little rock nipple on top of a hill.
From our vantage point, it doesn't look that prominent, but I think it's noteworthy. I would be flattered to have it named after me.
Why would Nelson name a little knob on a hill after his good friend? Question. Ow! There's a cactus here, be careful.
Salt extraction is a huge industry in Baja. Even before today's massive salt works were developed, the naturally occurring salt flats were known for their high quality. Nelson described the locals gathering salt directly from the ground to use in their homes. Nelson loved San Ignacio. He wrote, "It is one of the most beautiful, fertile, and populated oases in all the peninsula." The mission here has been in continuous use since 1728. Goldman's photos show that today, the mission is nearly identical to how it must have appeared to them on their expedition. And his shots of the local date farmers and their home life help paint the picture that this oasis town remains largely unchanged by time. It's easy to find this place charming, but historical context reveals that this isn't the whole story. San Ignacio was one of 28 missions founded on the Baja Peninsula, each unique. Smaller visitas were also part of this system, all linked by a road network, the El Camino Real.
The mission system was developed by Spain in order to colonize new lands, convert the natives that were living there to Christianity and to make them subjects of the King of Spain. So all El Camino Reals lead back to Madrid in a sense. In many places, you can go down into Baja California and see the missions and the history as it still is untouched.
Some missions are well preserved today, but many have been in ruins for a century or more. Others have been reconstructed or built over entirely. The mission system lasted over a century and a half. During this time, Native American populations were decimated. Europeans brought with them epidemics of smallpox, measles, typhus, and life on the missions was hell. Conversion to Christianity and brutal conditions imposed by the Spanish mean most tribes on the peninsula are now culturally extinct. This was already a distant memory by the time Nelson and Goldman arrived, and it's one reason why most of their photos of native people come from the mainland. The last missionaries left Mexico by 1840, but the missions and churches surviving today are reminders of a difficult and complex past.
There's a science to collecting birds, but there's also an art to it, and the skinning and stuffing part is really the artistic part. This is a tray of specimens, of scientific research specimens. These are all what we call study skins. Traditionally, a study skin was the most common specimen, and that involves cutting an incision down the breast of the bird or the mammal, turning them inside out, removing all the soft parts that would decay over time, and then stuffing them full of cotton, sewing them back up, laying them out to dry, and then that's a complete specimen there. Collector is E.W. Nelson. His field number is 1478, and this is accession number 2, so this may have come directly from him.
So at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a big movement by large museums all over the world to send out expeditions to collect specimens and bring those home to the city of the museum.
Museum collections, both animal and plant collections, played a huge role in the expansion of knowledge.
At that time, biologists were still trying to describe all the life that was out there. They were still trying to put names on all the plants and animals, the birds, the mammals.
So they were kind of building the library. So their main goal was just to get as many specimens as they could of different species for collections.
You had to have a big enough series that you could suss out all the variation because there are differences between the males and the females and the young and the adults and the ones that live in the mountains and the ones that live in the coast. And in order to really figure out what's what, you have to have a huge series of individuals in a tray that you can begin to look at. You know, oh, this is one species, this is the next species, this is something else.
Science itself is nothing more than a compilation or gathering of data from early or previous people. We may look at it very differently from a different perspective these days, but we're still making specimens and using what they had collected to come to the conclusions that we need to in our science fields today.
It's hard to overestimate the impact of Nelson and Goldman's work collecting specimens in Baja, throughout Mexico, and beyond. Their legacy is cemented by the sheer number of species that they've discovered, described, named, or that others have named after them. This list contains just a few examples of their namesakes. The full list numbers in the hundreds for each man and includes all sorts of plants, animals, and even geographic features. Many of these examples are subspecies of impressive high-order vertebrates: bears, elk, jaguars. Goldman has an entire genus of hummingbirds named after him. These names may seem purely symbolic, but the scientific value of the specimens they collected is actually increasing with time.
Even though Darwin's work had appeared in 1859, the notion of accepting natural selection as the mechanism of evolution really didn't happen until later, until some genetic work was done into the 20s and 30s and into the 40s.
Now, as technology progresses, there are a lot more questions that scientists can answer using historical research specimens that the original collectors couldn't even dream of.
When most of those early specimens were collected, nobody even knew what DNA was, and that's what everybody wants today from a specimen.
It so happens that we can recover DNA from dried specimens or from specimens preserved in alcohol or formaldehyde.
We can study the diseases that those animals were carrying back then. We can look at the genetics. You know, are these genetically the same populations as they were? Are they being mixed? Is there loss of genetic variation?
And the people who collected those in 1905 and 06, of course, had no idea that that would happen. They were just collecting to build the collection. When Nelson was preparing this, he just wanted to get a bird in a collection somewhere. They probably wouldn't have even guessed a female scientist would have been doing that research 100 years later either. So lots of progress has been made.
Back 100 years ago, we didn't know that we needed DNA or stable isotopes, and we have no idea what people are going to want from these specimens 100 years or 500 years from now. So it's really incumbent on us to collect everything that we can and get as much information as we can, because this is the most permanent, intangible, and complete record of this life.
Small coastal towns in this region, like Mule, still retain a lot of their old Baja charm. Until the Mex 1 highway was paved in the 1970s, the area was extremely remote. But its many historical buildings show that people have been drawn here for centuries.
The tranquility. That's the reason that I came here. From a big city to a small town, big difference. I belong from a Huichol community, and my mother is Spanish. In those days, 70 years ago, my mother family don't accept my father. And I grow real poor conditions. So I decided to cross the border illegal when I was 12, 13. My life changed every year for better. And when I resolved my immigration problems, I decided to come back to Mexico to pass the rest of my life peacefully. It's a beautiful place. Thank you.
Saludar. Ya.
After Laredo, it was time to head inland. When Nelson and Goldman took their pack train off the beaten path, it usually meant a long cross-country ride to the next waterhole so their animals could recuperate. For us and the motorcycles, it's a little different.
Just a little bit of sand in here, and it's not that deep, but it's still a bit of a struggle here. Every single muscle in my body is tense because it doesn't take much and it just pitches you out of there and then you're down in the dirt. But as you can see, oh yeah, it's just deep sand here. We end up using the clutch a lot. I'm down. Well, that's what working in the sand is all about. You just have no control.
Legitimately stuck.
Okay, hold on a second here.
The aqueduct at La Purísima was built by missionaries over 300 years ago to provide water for crops grown at the mission nearby. Hardly a trace of the mission remains, but the aqueduct is still used to irrigate farms throughout the valley. Kind of like the El Camino Real, the aqueduct had been repaired or improved in places over the years. So parts remain old and rough, while others have changed completely.
Alright, so we talked to some other bikers who said that this water crossing here, I'm not sure if it's this one or another one, is super slippery. So we're going to kind of... Whoa! You almost made it through though.
Right behind me is the Vado. And here in Mexico, it's where the river crosses the road. And it's notorious in the motorcycle community for being extremely slippery. And this is a prime example here where moss has grown over and it's as slick as ice. Life abounds around each oasis that we visited. These fertile lands are watered by the springs born in the core of the mountains to the east, where small streams flow for miles. But elsewhere, water is scarce. These water centers teem with life. The plants and animals thrive in these secluded and sparse water holes.
There are some cities, towns, I would say, villages that have changed very little. Their photographs show you a village that is not very different from what you see now. It's amazing how little things have changed and how well preserved things are. When you visit Comondú and look at it, that's basically what Nelson saw.
These small towns are like time capsules, and they owe a large part of their timeless character to the people who live in them.
I came here first in 1979, and I had a can of beer in my hand, and I was drinking this beer, and I had this vision that I was going to walk around Baja and write a book about it. Well, I was a complete couch potato. I felt so strongly. I had this certainty I was going to do this, and yet it made no sense. I was so fortunate that the people I met were the real Baja Californians, and their tradition of hospitality was unbelievable.
The people of Mexico were important to Nelson and Goldman as well. At times, they assumed the role of anthropologists as they traveled through Mexico, photographing the everyday lives of people they encountered.
When I walked the coastline, I couldn't make one Mexican take 1 peso for all they did for me. I did not expect that kindness and hospitality. That is a real treasure that I think will be very sad when that passes from the world.
Yo me llamo Kevin.
Kevin.
Sí. Kevin. Yo me llamo Daniel.
Daniel.
Sí. Yo me llamo Javier Alano, se va a llorar. ¡Eso, Yala! Así en esta. No me salgo en la cámara. Corten, corten, corten.
Cerquita juntito a mí, candela.
Trabajaba mi papá en la mina y me acuerdo que yo todo el tiempo les hacía comidita a los chamacos de Gustavo Villa y las chamacas las corría de la casa. Y los chamacos llegaban montados en un palito que venían en un caballo y decían, ya llegaron los abonados, Trini, me decían.
This is Trina Daggett. Her grandfather, Dick Daggett, had promised to sell supplies to Nelson and Goldman at a remote mine where he was working. Weeks later, they showed up and the mine was deserted, with Daggett nowhere to be found. They were hundreds of miles from a supply point, with just a pound of flour left to eat, when they put their tracking skills to use and found him miles away at the beach. Daggett's supply ship had failed to arrive, and he was forced to survive on sea turtles, fish, and wild honey. With both parties near starvation, the ship finally came in, saving the lives of Nelson, Goldman, and Daggett. After the inland oases, we continued south, looking for more of the unique life forms documented by the original expedition. Even in the arid expanses of Magdalena Plain, specialized plants have found ways to survive.
One cactus that's really quite special, because it is the only place in the world that a cactus grows like this, is what's called the creeping devil or caterpillar cactus. And it grows flat along the ground and dies back from the rear portion and continues to grow, laying down adventitious roots as it goes along the sandy substrate. So it is really creeping across the desert floor, and that is a very unique thing. our natural environments on the peninsula are shrinking more and more. And we're still finding new plants for science in these areas. And it is almost a little bit of a race against time before it has been altered so far that we can't find them any longer.
There's something incredibly special about this place. You experience this complete disconnectivity from the outside world. Parts of it are still incredibly wild, but you're seeing more and more of this creeping in of human influence that's negatively impacting its fragile ecosystem.
Cuando me acuerdo que miraba que mataban las tortugas, pues como una lágrima suelta, ¿no? Por los ojos. Y ya cuando me doy cuenta que en realidad pues la lágrima de la tortuga es como una defensa del agua salada, ¿no? Pero de todos modos, pues te crea cierto sentimiento y eso fue un cambio a mí muy drástico en mi mente pues, y en el corazón, ¿no? Y también...
Julio Solis, like many from this area, grew up eating sea turtles with his family. It was something he didn't think much about until the turtles began to disappear.
Es como comienza así, pues mi historia y más que nada de un amigo que me agarra de la mano y me dice, vente, ¿no? Hay que trabajar en conservando la tortuga.
That friend was Jay Nichols. He's been working to save sea turtles for over 2 decades.
I hear over and over again that solving conservation issues is a matter of behavior change, which implies that we should understand how the human brain works. Maybe we should talk to the experts on the human brain and human behavior, and those people are called psychologists and neuroscientists. So I call that neuroconservation. It's sort of a mashup of neuroscience and conservation biology.
Jay and Julio have found success where experts thought none was possible.
De lo de la tortuga, el señor sabe.
These are the ruins of a cannery that used to package sea turtle meat. At its peak, tens of thousands of turtles were processed here on Isla Magdalena every year.
Cuando empezamos con este trabajo, era sumamente difícil, ¿no? Porque primero todos se ríen de ti. Por mismo comentario de mi amigo Jay, cuando empezó, que le decían, ¿no? Decían, esto es algo imposible, la tortuga ya no está en peligro de extinción, está extinguida.
You know, with Julio, when we first started working together, he used to say, I really don't care about these turtles. I'm just here for the job. Not so much trying to convince me, but trying to convince himself, because the more we were working together, I could tell that he was beginning to care. You know, his sort of young, macho, cynical self was being challenged by this bigger world that it was opening up to him, that he liked.
Y de ahí es donde pues ya me nace que no solamente la tortuga marina es lo que tenemos que cuidar, ¿no? Es importante el agua, el mar, ¿no? Es importante el manglar, es importante todos los recursos que hay alrededor, sí. El objetivo es, o la misión es, defender, vaya, la calidad del agua.
Before the automobile was practical, and before the airplane was invented, if you didn't want to walk in Baja, you basically had 2 options: horses or boats. The original expedition used steamships, sailing vessels, motor launches, and small canoes to help them explore all over Mexico. The specific types of boats may have changed in 110 years, but they remain as important as ever.
Rich with wildlife, deserted beaches, the Sea of Cortez is one of the most diverse oceans on the planet. This coast is born by volcanic activity and continues to push away from the mainland of Mexico. It has over 900 islets and islands, all of which are now under protection.
Here we are on Espiritu Santo Island, and behind me is a magnificent frigate bird breeding colony. The birds feed far offshore in the Gulf of California, and they come in to feed their chicks. Behind me you can hear them calling out, "Feed me, feed me." The frigate birds are a really interesting seabird because they've actually lost the ability to walk on land. They have really tiny feet, and so they're very particular about where they land in the colony. Once they set up a nest site, essentially, the chicks will stay in that nest site for more than 6 months without moving. And they just wait there for the parents to come back to feed them meal after meal after meal.
This area in the early 1900s was one of the chief producers of pearls in the world. By the turn of the 20th century, natural regeneration could not keep up with the harvest demands, and the first artificial pearl oyster farm was built. What survives today are the pearl nurseries and an artificial dike about 1/3 of a mile long.
A little farther south is Isla Raza. It's famous for being the home of the biznaga, an endemic species of giant barrel cactus, which the original expedition photographed while here. They also noted the presence of a unique species of iguana.
This is the Baja California spiny-tailed iguana. There's been some question about how it evolved and how it got here. And there's some evidence that suggests that some of the Native American tribes from the Mexican mainland may have moved these lizards out to these islands for a food source. And then over time, these lizards became adapted and specialized to these various islands and are actually now considered a separate species.
After Cerralvo, we had to get back on the road and continue south. That meant coming ashore in La Paz, a place Nelson documented through many photos.
You can recognize the pier in his photos and some of what is now El Malecón, the coastal avenue. But if you look behind, you will see that the city ends 1 or 2 blocks away from the beach and there's nothing more. And now La Paz, of course, is a huge urban conglomerate.
Boys and girls, your attention please. Here is your group. Stay. For amuse and also for you dance more.
From Cortez's failed colony to a city of 250,000 people, La Paz has really come into its own in its 400-plus year history. Some of that history is still visible as you head south on the Mex 1 and dip below the Tropic of Cancer toward the Cape. But one thing the area is known for today might leave Nelson and Goldman baffled.
Surfers forge this acute sense of appreciation for these out-of-the-way places, and that's what's led them to kind of flock to Baja. The warm water and its remoteness are all part of its allure for surfers.
Surfing for me is in my blood. It's part of my life right now. It's like a lifestyle. I cannot live without ocean, without surfing.
Surfers are becoming active environmentalists because they see and experience firsthand the changes that negatively impact the places they care about. When the ocean is affected, the surfer becomes affected. In a way, it's kind of this love affair, and we feel this responsibility to protect the ocean.
10 years ago, right here, there was like a secret, nobody come here. Right now, more buildings, more hotels right here, that's like sad, but I want to be here. It's part of my life, surfing, so I don't really care, Everybody welcome here.
Oh my God. I'm not optimistic about the future. The commercial fishery has pretty much collapsed.
The interplay between fishing and the development of the Baja Peninsula is unbelievably interconnected. Baja was one of the richest environments that anybody in Mexico had ever seen when they landed there and started to fish the sharks and the turtles.
Turtles had the advantage because they could stay alive for up to 7 days without water, as long as they were in mostly shade. They could be stacked on stick bed trucks and taken out. Concurrent with the turtle fishery, they were also harvesting shark, and this was used for shark liver oil.
All indications are on all the science and the people who live here is that it's less and less of everything. The fishermen up and down the peninsula have overfished all the species that they were used to.
I can remember seeing boats heaped to the gunnels full of large fish, and now boats come in and it's just a few boxes of small fish that are getting unloaded.
When I first started going down there, the shark fishery was in full swing, and we could go out to the shark fish camps and see hammerhead sharks and mako sharks and thresher sharks 10, 12, 14 feet long all over the beach. And now the fish camps are no longer practical for the fishermen, so that you don't find them anymore. It's rare to see a shark. Just the macro life in the ocean has declined tremendously.
Cycles of boom and bust have plagued Baja since long before these recent collapses. Wherever they went, Nelson and Goldman encountered ranches, mines, and settlements that were given up and forgotten. This was a phosphate mine, abandoned when deposits were depleted. Then it was a fishing camp, abandoned when the sharks were killed off. Everywhere, you'll see layers of economic activity laid on top of itself again and again. Until recently, this has been cyclical, but as they become larger and more frequent, some are worried the busts could be permanent, and the booms will stop coming.
Unsustainable harvest of natural resources in an environment as fragile as the Baja California Peninsula have produced repeatedly environmental collapses.
The availability of fresh water has really impacted the development of the towns of Baja California, and the lack of fresh water and the overabundance of sunshine make development difficult. But what we can see now is the modern world has allowed us to bring in resources to compensate for these features. Today, these towns have grown considerably larger because they've been able to tap into deep water tables and sources of what are called fossil water. How long that can last is anybody's guess, but it's clear that the development is far outpacing the supply of water.
From an economic point of view, the pressure on the peninsula is coming from the north. A lot of foreigners come to a place like Mexico, which has tremendous amount of poverty, and on the one hand, they look at the poverty and what people do or fail to do in their eyes and see it as a sign of underdevelopment or not being intelligent enough. And on the other hand, they over-romanticize things that they see, when in reality it's not that way at all. And I think the two extremes don't make any sense. Big money in Mexico is trying to get as much land on the beaches as possible and ensure for some future development. A well-developed first world area for the jet set and the tourists that can afford it, and then you have basic towns for the people who provide the services. That's one big change with ecotourism, is to go places and learn and not so much enjoy the beach, because let's face it, one beach is the same beach everywhere, so who knows?
Shortly after returning from the Devil's Road expedition, we received tragic news that our friend Pancho had passed away. To us, he represented the true spirit of Baja California, and the loss of a friend like him is a brutal reminder of the fragility of life in such a harsh and remote environment. The dangers of the road haven't gone away, but they have changed. If you could stand at a certain spot on the El Camino Real for its entire history, what would you see? How many saints or devils have traveled this road?
We take for granted that we can drive the truck, take a motorboat, get most places easily. I don't think I could, or most people could do what they did. They were exceptional. And I don't think people are made like that today.
Es un trabajo muy bonito, mija, pero es un trabajo muy duro y muy peligroso. ¿Por qué? Porque si no lo sabes hacer, como te digo, puedes perder hasta la vida. El atuendo del vaquero aquí de Baja California. Lo voy a llevar hasta que me muera. Yo me llamo Óscar Ojeda Montaño. Vivo orgulloso de mi origen, de mis raíces y de mi pueblo. Pues es un equipo que ya se ha ido perdiendo las costumbres. Y eso es triste, mija, porque son tus raíces y no las debes de perder nunca. Yo guardo mis costumbres de mis abuelos, de mis bisabuelos, de mis abuelos, de mis tíos. Como luego dicen, se viene por bolengo, lo traes en la sangre. Naces con eso. Lo heredas de tu sangre, de tus antepasados.
Oscar's kind of this window into the past. I can almost picture him riding on horseback right next to Goldman and Nelson. I flew down to the Cape with my team to get back to roots and to put ourselves in their shoes. After a day of surfing on the coast, we left the motorcycles behind and we headed into the mountains. Nelson and Goldman spent time in this area collecting plant specimens in what they call the Victoria Mountains, which we now refer to as the Sierra La Laguna Mountains.
Hey, loco!
In these kind of more secluded areas, on horseback, a mode of travel truer to their own, it almost seems like not a lot has changed. You feel like you are in the last century. We actually rode right across the Arroyo San Bernardo, which they describe in detail in their journals. Just to think that they had been in this very same spot 110, 111 years before was absolutely incredible.
Yo no descanso en un día, mija. Yo trabajo todos los días. En la vida tienes que ser práctico, mija, y realista. Yo no voy a cambiar, dije, yo nací así, así me voy a morir. Un niñito tengo de 6 meses. Pues yo le pido mucho a Dios que mi hijo, pues ojalá, que él herede. Porque él tiene todo para ganar.
The road home was calling. We were approaching the 2-month mark of our motorcycle expedition. And after circling around the Cape, we were pointed northwards once again.
We as humans will only ever really feel compelled to preserve something or conserve something if we care about it. There's a certain feeling you get when you're in Baja, and I think if others could feel that, that alone could inspire.
¿Cuántos años tienes?
Cuatro.
So the cognitive, emotional, psychological, social, and spiritual benefits of Baja being the place that it is are enormous. And go back as far as you can to find things that people have written about that place. That's what they were trying to say when they were painting on the walls of the caves. They weren't just trying to say the food is here, the water's here, and everything's good. They were trying to say that our minds are blown because this is awesome. And that's kind of what we continue to try to say about that place, and to depict through words and through images and through art and through songs and through science. And that's why we go there and count turtles, or we study the cacti. We're trying to say this is awe-inspiring, this is wonderful. It makes your life better when you can just stand in it. The future of Baja is, at least partly, as a global center or school for awe. And the science is fascinating. So when we feel awe, you see yourself as part of the whole in a way that you don't when you're sitting at the kitchen table or when you're in traffic or when you're online. We need that feeling. Our leaders need to be in touch with that.
There is no doubt that Nelson and Goldman were also in touch with this. Their sense of connection to the larger environment guided their study of Baja. But increasingly, just studying it is not enough.
Conservation in Baja is not just about Mexico. It's really a multinational problem, and we all have to do what we can to help preserve these resources.
It's like Oscar says, you need pride, shame, and dignity. Pride in our shared natural environment, the shame about the things that we've done to it, and the dignity to roll up your sleeves and fix it.
Despite what otherwise looks like complete devastation for Baja, we are seeing success stories. There's hope.
One symbol for the recovery of a species in Baja, one symbol for hope, has to be the California condor. But the frustration of not finding any in the mountains on our way down stayed with us the whole trip. So on our way home, we thought, what the hell? Let's go back up and try again. Just 2 months after our first visit to these mountains, the snow had melted, revealing new life. And then, soaring above us,
if in some part of Mexico there are reasons for hope, that is Baja California. Nowadays, condors are flying in Baja and reproducing in Baja and nesting in Baja.
Well, it's just San Pedro Mártir we're really lucky to have released them there because it's one of the most pristine areas of all release sites. And that's why it's always good to have hope. Hope is essential in any endeavor, and when you set your goals and you reach them, it inspires you to keep on going.
Nelson and Goldman were the last of the general naturalists, but some of the first to realize the value of conserving Earth's ecosystems. Their ideas sparked the ideas of the next generation. Maybe now it's our responsibility to be the last of our kind, to create the next wave of explorers and help shift the perspective of future generations.
¡Loco!
Loco me llama porque bailo gogo, porque soy loco, loco de remate, y siempre deberé bailar, bailar gogo. puedo ayudar. ¡Me muerdo la oreja! ¡Me muerdo los ojos! ¡Y toda la gente! ¡Loco! ¡Loco yo! ¡Loco no! ¡Loca soy ahora! ¡Soy loca! ¡Yo no soy loca! ¡Ay! ¡Ya no puedo fingir más de hombre! ¡Loco! ¡Agarren a la loca!
Caesar.